Today on Hebrew Book Review, Stories in Easy Hebrew by Ruti Yudovich. And welcome back to Hebrew Book Review. I'm Sapir, and today I'm reviewing Stories in Easy Hebrew by Ruti Yudovich. This book is a collection of short stories, and some of them are extremely relevant to children. Others, not so much, although there's nothing that would be inappropriate for children to read. There's a few pictures here and there. Not enough to keep my 12-year-old engaged. He still really likes to read, especially when he's reading in Hebrew. He still really feels like he wants more pictures, bigger writing, less words on the page. He's still a little intimidated. So for that reason, I'm going to classify this book as adult reading materials, because adult learners are usually a little more motivated. I know my kid is mostly learning Hebrew only because I'm making him, and whereas adult learners really want to learn, so they're going to be more forgiving with the fact that there aren't pictures on the page. But there's certainly nothing in here that's inappropriate. If you want to read these stories to your child who is learning Hebrew, or if they're interested in reading, maybe they're different from my son, they can read this too. So it really can work for students who are learning with a teacher or on their own, but it's not really teaching materials. It's really more of a book full of reading practice so that we get practice reading actual full sentences in Hebrew and reading through an entire story. And so it's not like teaching grammar points here and there. It's just basically teaching us how these stories are told in Hebrew. This book is about 20%, maybe a little bit more religious. There's a whole section on Bible stories, Bible/like Jewish folktales. And so if you are a strict, no religious materials family, this book won't be for you because there are some religious stories in there. But if you're not super strict, you can just skip over that section. You're not going to really, the religious content is not hidden anywhere. There's a section, it tells you where it is. You can skip those stories if you don't want to read them. The font is a really typical font. It's the Times New Roman style, the one that you would see in a newspaper or in any typical book. It looks like it's probably 12 point, maybe a little bit smaller, 11 point, but I think my judgment on it might be a little skewed because there is a little bit of English mixed in it, and the English does look like a 12-point font, and sometimes when you have English and Hebrew side by side and they're both 12-point, depending on the font, that Hebrew can look really small, or it might look just smaller than the English. I see this happen all the time when I'm making a graphic for my videos. So they might both be 12-point. Either way, I find it pretty easy to read. If you're wanting to be able to read a newspaper, you should be able to read this font and at this size, because this is pretty much the size that you'll see in a newspaper. All right, this is the genius or part of the genius of this book, is that every story is written with nikud and without nikud. When it's written with nikud, sometimes some words are full nikud, some are partial, but most of them are ktiv chaser, so the traditional spelling. But when they're written without nikud, it's just without nikud. So you will have all those extra vavs and yods that you would typically see in the modern spelling that has no nikud. Before using this book, the student definitely needs to know how to read sentences. So they obviously are going to need to know all of their letters and vowels, be able to pronounce words, be able to figure out what words mean, and understand Hebrew sentence structure, although this book really helps us kind of see the sentence structure in action. But, basic sentence structure the student should already have a pretty good grasp on basic sentence structure in Hebrew. But of course, a lot of students, they advance and advance and advance, but they still feel really nervous about trying to read without nikud. And this is a great book to help the students get that practice of reading natural Hebrew, even though they're a little nervous about reading without nikud, because you have the stories both ways. So it's a collection of about 30 stories, most of which are very well known to most adults that I know and probably adults around the world. There's The Tortoise and the Hare, The Mouse and the Lion, there's The Wizard of Oz, Cinderella, the story about rocks in a jar. It's the one where you learn time management by putting the big rocks in first. I don't actually know the name of that story. And then on the Jewish side, there's the story about learning the Torah on one foot, the Judgment of Solomon, the one about the two moms with the baby. It even has a story about the verbal system where it talks about the verbs as like a family of 7 brothers. And I loved it. It was a really, really cute story. And it kind of assigns like character traits to them that actually really fit the binyanim, and it's just done in a really cute way. Yeah, I really enjoyed that story. It was a lot of fun reading about how she described the different binyanim. The binyanim, the hitfa'el being it was all about himself, and the hif'il always making other people do stuff. I just thought that was genius. And there's also a glossary in the back of the book of all of the words that she defines in the book, although I'm not quite sure why you would need it, because all of the more difficult words are defined right there in the text. So I have been reading these stories myself. I have not been using this with my son. He is still at an age where, even though when he reads in English, of course, he reads books without pictures all the time, but when he reads in Hebrew or in Spanish, that's his other foreign language, he still really appreciates when there's only a few sentences on the page. He gets a little intimidated when the page is just full of Hebrew. I generally read one story per day. You can read one per day. Some of the stories in each section, the first stories are shorter and a little bit easier than the later stories. So the later stories can be quite a few pages. And depending on your Hebrew level, if you're struggling with reading the words, or you're having to really look up and kind of think about what the whole sentence means, it might take you more than a day, right? It might take you more than the time you have allotted in your day to get through an entire story. And I love that each story is written with and without nikud. And that way, you can of course choose whichever version fits your comfort level. And of course, if you are at a level where you feel like, no, I don't want to read without nikud yet, you can read the whole book, and then a year later or a couple months later, when you feel more confident, you can go back, and now that you know the stories, you can read them again and try to read them without nikud. So it's really almost like 2 books in one. And so I read it without nikud because my ulpan is hellbent that nobody ever reads with nikud. We learn a word once, we see it with nikud, we never see it with nikud again, ever. So I am very used to reading without nikud. And And one thing I like about the fact that there are two versions of each story is that that second version, the version without nikud, also does not have the translations. But I know that I don't have to go to Google Translate or my dictionary every single time. I know that it's right there on the page before if it's a word that I don't know. And even though I have finished my ulpan, my ulpan has 8 levels, and I have successfully completed level 8. I'm still going because I feel like language learning is just a lifelong process. But I have completed all of the levels of my ulpan. There are plenty of words in this book that I'm not really familiar with. And so even though a lot of my teachers consider me an advanced student, there is always more to learn. There's always more vocabulary that you've never seen or heard before. And there is a lot in these books. I've learned a lot of vocabulary by reading her stories. The only thing I don't like about the book is that it uses in-text translation. And that means that the text is right there next to the word that she thinks is difficult, right? She doesn't translate every single word. She just translates the more difficult words. When you're an author or a teacher and you are writing for students that you know this is not their native language, you have that decision to make. You can put the translation of the difficult words right there in the text next to the Hebrew word, and that will help with the flow. The student will not have to pause at all. It's right there, so they can continue on reading the story without too much of a distraction at this word that they don't know. Or the other way to go is to either put the words at the bottom of the page, sometimes they're at the side, or sometimes they're at the end of the chapter or the end of the story. And yeah, that can affect the flow, because now if you're seeing a word that you don't know, it can affect your comprehension of the entire story, because now you've just been flipping to the bottom or to the side or wherever those words are. It makes you a little more independent, because it makes you have to think about, can I get through this story without knowing this one word? Or can I figure out this word from its shoresh or from context? Or do I have to flip to wherever the word is so that I can figure it out? And so to me, I just feel like in-text translation makes us a little bit more lazy, because our eyes automatically go to, the word that is in our native language. So our brain doesn't even try to see if it can figure out what the word is, because our native language word is right there. But Ruti made her decision. I understand why she did it. And to be honest, the fact that she doesn't put the translation in the nikudless version of the story fixes that problem, because what do? I read the nikudless version and there's no translation. So all of those little brain exercises that I'm talking about, trying to figure it out from the context, what kind of word fits there, do I know other words from this shoresh? I can do all of that, and then if I still can't figure it out, I just flip one page over to the version that has the nikud and the translations, and so that solves my problem right there. And so if you are learning Hebrew, you've gotten to a point where you feel like you can start reading stories, but you're not ready to delve into, a huge book or something that's meant for native speakers, I think this is a really great resource. I really enjoy reading the stories. I enjoy getting to learn the vocabulary that goes with the stories that I've known and loved all throughout my life. And it's just fun. It's just fun to read I love reading in any language that I speak, and it's also definitely fun to be reading stories that you know. Reading stories that you know, and she even mentions this in her introduction, that reading stories that you know helps you to be able to figure out the unknown words because you know the story, you know what kind of word that you're expecting here, and of course it's just fun to read a familiar story. All right, so that's it for Stories in Easy Hebrew by Ruti Yudovich. I highly recommend it for students who are ready to start reading stories to be able to use it to advance their knowledge of Hebrew. As always, if you have any questions or feedback, please leave it in the comments. And if you'd have a book that you'd like me to review, leave that in the comments and I will do my best to get my hands on it and do a video about it. Hit like if you enjoyed this video and subscribe and hit the notification bell if you want to see more. Lehitraot papa ama ba'a. See you next time.